Osiyo! My name's Jessica and welcome to my channel. Today we're gonna talk about the weather. Do you know what's crazy to me? I have never seen a tutorial on translating the same background into different types of weather or times of day. I mean, I've seen in plenty of videos where artists usually give the advice that you want those types of things in your portfolio in order to be noticed by industry professionals, but I've never actually seen anyone, I think, do a tutorial like on how to do that. And I feel like it's really important because it showcases your ability to meet their project's needs. And there may be a video out there somewhere, but I'm just not finding it. I feel like between the two, like the times of day and the types of weather seems to be a little less talked about. So that's what I wanted this video to be about today. And for the record, I'm not really sure if this is how you're supposed to do it. This is just how I do it. For this background, I've chosen to draw a field. The first picture will be before the storm, the second picture is during the storm, and the last picture is after the storm. This is a fun challenge because you have to think about not only different types of lighting, but how the objects in your environment would interact with the weather around them. We're going to go ahead and start off with this bright, sunny field before the storm. So for this composition, I'm blocking in a couple of different hues and values to vary the spotty lighting and types of grass that are naturally seen in a field. Realistically, whenever you look across a wild-growing field, there's so many different colors and textures. If you make everything uniform, it's gonna look more like a front lawn. As you get towards the bottom of the canvas, you want to make sure that the size of your brush grows larger to indicate the distance from your point of view. Whenever I first started this piece, it was theoretically going to be during the day with no clouds, which is why I was blocking it with all the hues and values. But later on you'll see where I go back and redo this step after deciding I wanted to paint this right before a storm. I'm now starting to picture where the clouds would be in my environment and how their shadows would be casted. I switch up the clouds multiple times during this, so yeah. Funny enough, as I was painting this, there was actually a storm rolling in outside, so I went out there quickly to observe what the sky looked like whenever the clouds began to go gray, and how the grass around me interacted with the random splotches of sunlight against a dark sky. After muting the colors down for the cloud coverage, I start adding saturated patches of grass to indicate where the sunlight would be. In case you're wondering, I'm using the Grassy brush pack from Devin L. Kurtz. I have her YouTube link below in the description, and I encourage you to check out her stuff because, wow, she's incredible when it comes to colors and value. It's extremely likely that you've seen her work already. Devin has a whole tutorial on making grassy fields, and she explains it very well, so if you're really wanting to make a grassy field for this exercise, I would jump over to her video first since I'll be focusing more on the translation of this piece rather than the design or layout of it. After getting a general map of the layout, it's time to add the details. At this moment, I'm mainly working in value first, then hue. I want to make the shadowed parts a darker green and the grass in the sun a lighter green. Now we're just continuing to add little details like rocks, flowers, and weeds. It's important to realize that if there's a dirt path going through a patch of greenery, there likely won't be a harsh transition from the dirt to the tall grass. It's more realistic to see smaller patches of grass or random weeds sticking out of the dirt along the edges. As a stylistic choice, I wanted to add in the sun rays as if they were peeking through the clouds. I've always felt like sun rays and light speckles give art a more fantasy vibe and helps guide the eye to where you want the focus to be. Not gonna lie, I probably added in too much in all of my work, and I should really look into cutting that back. Okay, so we have our starting point. This will be our reference image whenever we create our second and third version of this background. Technically, you can do this with any outdoor background that you've already painted. You don't have to create a whole new piece for this exercise if you don't want to. Let's begin our second piece. The first thing we want to do is make a duplicate copy of the background we just painted, so that way all of the layers stay intact, but we have the base for our second version. This version is going to be during the storm. We need to start thinking about what the scene will look like with wind and rain affecting everything. You can see here where I'm starting to delete the layers that don't really make any sense for this new scene. Shadows from clouds that were casted before the storm and sun rays are the first to go. If I'm not sure on a layer, I hide it instead of deleting it, just in case it could be altered later to fit the scene. Since the grass in the foreground is mainly what's going to be in focus, I decide to start working on it first. Still using that same grassy brush pack, grab one of the windswept brushes and start painting on a grayer looking grass. During a storm, the cloud coverage causes everything to be more of a mid-tone color. We can always adjust these colors later on, but for now, we just need to get an idea of what it's going to look like. After getting a basic idea, I start to work on the rest of the grass. Each time I want to work on a different section, I create a new layer above the existing one that we painted for before the storm. This way, I can ensure that all of the grass is in the correct place from where it was before, and we don't have new random patches of grass growing all over the path just because there's a storm now. After successfully laying out all of the new blades of grass, indicating which way the wind is blowing, it's time to start figuring out the weeds that were scattered throughout the field. We want to make sure, even though the colors have changed because of the lighting, the color value of each type of weed should still match the original piece of art. You can see where I start to mess around with the colors of the weeds in the midground until I feel like they have the correct value. The one weed in the foreground is a good example of having the wrong value. In theory, it should be a lot lighter than the rest of the grass because in our original painting, it was naturally lighter as well as being hit by sunlight. You'll see me correct that later on at the end of the video. I continue brushing the weeds off to the left to indicate that they too are being blown by the wind. However, they're a little more stiff than the blades of grass, so they don't lean quite as far. Now I'm beginning to work on the path. Because this is going to be during a storm, everything will be a little bit darker. I shadow the path and start including patches of darker brown to indicate water soaking through the dirt. I use this technique to sort of map out where I would like the puddles of water to go. After getting a clear idea of where I think the water will gather, I paint it onto the path, adjust the color, and then use a motion blur to create the edges of water that have varying transparencies. I duplicate that layer and mess around with some of the layer blending options to see what I think helps it look more like water. After feeling satisfied with how the water is placed, I move back to all of the flowers that were in the field. I use the distort tool in order to move not only the flowers themselves, but the stems that they're attached to. We want the bottom of the stems to stay planted in the ground, while the tops need to move a little towards the left to indicate the wind. After feeling satisfied with that, I move on to the sky. I flip through some of the options for clouds that I created in the original background, and find a good base for during the storm. Depending on what time of day it is, the sky will usually be one solid color during a heavy rain. If it's in the middle of the day, it'll be a lighter gray. If it's at night, it'll be a dark gray. I had taken some video of a couple of different storms over the course of a week, and noticed that whenever I looked upwards, I couldn't tell that there were necessarily clouds above me, although I knew there had to be. I'm not sure if the rain obscures the atmosphere enough to where you can't tell the difference between clouds and sky, or maybe the clouds are just so dense that they become one solid mass? Either way, it was surprising to see because in my head I pictured it different. The painter side of me wanted to embellish a little bit and create some type of variation in the sky despite what I observed in real life. I think it still ended up working out for this painting, and it looks in place despite it not being completely accurate. I move back down to the petals and start creating ripples in the water. Using one of the innate Procreate brushes, I paint the whole canvas with this water texture and distort it over the front petals. After setting the layer to a clipping mask, I duplicate it and adjust it to the background petals. Now that we have a pretty good idea of how this composition is going to look with the storm, it's time to pull out the original picture and make adjustments to help it match better. Overall, the colors do seem believable. What I'm mainly worried about is the positioning of the grass and weeds. We want to make sure that the objects in our painting are altered to fit the weather change, but still maintain their integrity within our environment. I see where I missed one of the weeds in the foreground and added in. Since it's being blown to the left, you'll be able to see more of it, than you did in the first picture. Next up is creating the atmospheric perspective. I chose a blue-gray color because I feel like it matches the mood of the painting as well as the general color of the rain we'll be painting in later. For the rain, I'm using Aaron Blaze's Rain, Snow, Dust, and Debris brush pack. This specific brush pack is what I use for most of my water painting needs. It comes in handy and has really helped me create some beautiful features. After painting various sizes of water drops, I rotate them around to match how strong the wind is blowing in this environment. I focus on the puddles and start to color in some of the greens seen in the grasses. Realistically, a little bit of green would be reflecting in these pools of water, so I blend them together with that muted blue. Something that I forgot to screen record was adding in the water droplets to the puddles. I used a brush from that same Aaron Blaze brush pack and erased the previous water ripples where the drops landed. Here you can see where I select the water droplet and tilt it at the same angle that the rain's coming in at. Using an inking brush, I repair any lines in the ripples afterwards. We continue on to the foreground with those blades of grass. I brush on general water droplets before painting on a few varying ones. After looking at photos of grass during rain, it was clear to see that the water was constantly running down the blade and dripping off the end, or running down the blade towards the root. I begin to paint those motions with an inking brush until the grass is mostly filled with water. We move on to the rest of the grass in our environment and use that same droplet brush, sporadically painting it across the field to make it appear wet. I continue doing some last-minute touch-ups with more rain details and color changes. Here is the final version of our second piece. Between the two so far, this one is my favorite. The third piece will take place after the storm. It ends up being a combination of both our first and second backgrounds with brighter colors and lighting similar to the first, yet still saturated with water like the second. We start out the same as the second version. Create a duplicate canvas with all of the layers still intact. Go through layer by layer and delete the ones that don't make sense for this next version that we're going to be painting. The rain and a layer of clouds are among the first things to go. We will definitely be replacing the windswept grass, but we don't necessarily want to do it right now because we want to make sure that whenever we replace it with the normal grass and weeds, it'll be in the correct spot. So for now, the windswept grass is used as a placeholder. I work on lightening the sky and add a few lighter colored clouds to show that the storm has passed. Now it's time to drop in our grass and weeds from that first canvas. The next few steps are just me going back and forth between the two canvases, copying and pasting full layers in, and then rearranging them into the correct order. This is what I was meaning whenever I said that this canvas will literally be both of the previous canvases combined. It takes a little time to copy and paste each individual item, but soon you'll see a big difference in how this environment looks. By doing this, we can more easily visualize what this field looks like after a storm. A few things that we will be keeping from the second version of this are the water droplets on the blades of grass, the puddles of water, and the wet dirt path. You'll see as I slowly convert the elements of this painting into deeper, saturated colors. This gives the impression that the rocks and weeds have soaked up water. We want to get rid of any harsh shadows from the first canvas because the cloud coverage here is more overcast than it is direct sunlight. I clean up the edges of the dirt path where the grass meets it, then take a moment to check the value of the whole piece. I realize that part of what I'm not liking about this is the fact that the entire piece is fighting to be the focal point. I solved this by creating more of an atmospheric perspective. We want the mountains in the background to blend with our sky better. At this point, I'm not really happy with the color choice, but I'm not really sure how to solve the problem just yet, and I find myself getting frustrated. I decide to take a break from figuring out the colors for now and focus on an idea that sounded fun. I jump around a lot whenever this happens because I don't want to get burnt out. Most of the time, whenever I stop in the middle of something frustrating and work on a different element of the painting, it helps me solve the problem I'm having and keeps me in the game longer. After creating the rainbow, I get rid of some of the water ripples in the puddles and redistort the remaining ones in order to give a varied look from the last canvas. Although I think I forgot to screen record that part. I try again to visualize the color of this field. I darken the field and add a little bit more yellow to the tall weeds. I feel like the colors in this third version match the other two much better than it did before. I take a break again on coloring and start to touch up the water droplets on the grass. It's important to remember that because it's not actively raining, you won't have streams of water running down the blades. Or rather, if you did, it would only be one or two. This means that our water droplets will resemble dewdrops instead. After looking at several reference photos, I noticed that the dewdrops would typically form on the tips of the blades of grass, as well as a few randomly on the stalk. I take a moment to work on the lighting in this scene. I imagine that the sun is now behind our point of view, and while the clouds are still creating an overcast, the front of our scene would likely have a few golden tones. Now that we have the colors decided on, it's time to continue making everything look wet. I work on these taller weeds first and start to draw droplets of water on each plant, then add a few highlights to the weeds in front. After running out of ideas on what I could do with this painting, I decide it's finally time to pull out that first canvas. I compare the two pictures and work on making them match not only in composition, but in color as well. I make sure the focal point is clear by testing the value in this third painting and making adjustments to how light and dark some of these colors are. The last thing I decide to paint is the water on the rocks. I paint on several layers and play around with the transparency of each one to try to get the best look. Here is our finished piece for the third canvas after the storm. I'm going to be totally transparent here. This is my least favorite version. I really struggled with the coloring on this, and I feel like my technique could have been a little more clean. It's hard being your own critic sometimes, and in this case, an art director likely would have had some good feedback to help strengthen this for a production. Here's a picture of all three together. So, as standalone pieces, I have my favorite and my least favorite already picked out like I said before. But whenever I look at all three of these together, I genuinely love what I'm seeing. I feel like individually it's easy to pick out all of the issues with each one, but whenever I look at them side by side, it looks like a matching set. This is the goal that you want to reach with your efforts. You want to make sure that all three pieces look like they're supposed to be in the exact same location. You want one picture to believably lead into the next. I'm still not happy with the water I painted on the rocks after the storm, and I am definitely still questioning if I should have included the sun rays before the storm. I'm not sure if it's me being overly critical of my work or what. Honestly, I hope that's what it is, because that means that this whole thing would be better received. Thanks for watching, and I hope this gave you some insight onto how to better translate your piece of art. Enjoy the next video. Bye!